Broadcast television once unified the nation from the moon landing to presidential debates, from cultural icons to breaking war coverage. America experienced history together, but that era is fading. Senator Ted Cruz says traditional broadcasters are now fighting to survive, squeezed by streaming platforms, social media giants, and global tech companies. So here's the big question. Are America's broadcast ownership laws outdated relics of another era, or necessary safeguards against media consolidation? As Congress re-examines the 39% national television ownership cap, the future of local news and who controls it hangs in the balance. Let's break it down.
Broadcast media stood at the epicenter of American historical and cultural life. It brought the nation classics like I Love Lucy and shaped the music landscape with Elvis or the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show. Twitter being what it is, I watched the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show yesterday. And wow, they were young. It showed Americans the realities of war, the wonder of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and the defining political moments of their time, from the Nixon-JFK debate to President Reagan's clarion call to tear down this wall. Through these shared viewing experiences, broadcasters helped to embed iconic moments in the collective American consciousness. The media's power to frame events and shape public perception is substantial. So it is understandable why Congress placed limits on broadcast media ownership, intended to prevent a monopoly on programming and viewpoints. Indeed, for much of the last century, holding a broadcast license was often called a license to print money. With limited competition, station owners commanded massive audiences and steady profits. But that era has passed. Cable and satellite ushered in 24/7 news, while the internet and mobile technologies unleashed a wave of streaming services, news and entertainment sites, and social media, flooding American screens with endless content and fragmenting what were previously universal audiences. Today, broadcasters are fighting to stay competitive against media and tech company with national and often global reach. This raises an important question. Are longstanding broadcast media ownership rules still relevant in the digital age? And if so, to what extent? In recent years, some of these rules have been rolled back or eliminated. Whether more reform is needed or if today's status quo remains sound policy is what we will explore today. In the Telecommunications Act of 1996, Congress anticipated the rise of today's competitive market by directing the FCC to periodically review its broadcast ownership rules with an eye towards deregulation. That's what statute says right now. Every 4 years, the FCC was to decide whether to repeal or modify any regulation that no longer served the public interest. One rule, however, was deliberately set out: the national TV audience reach cap. In 2004, Congress specifically directed the FCC to set this cap at 39% of U.S. television households, and it has remained at the same level for 22 years. Now, as several major mergers loom, the FCC is considering lifting or eliminating this cap. Some argue that lifting the cap will allow broadcasters to scale, to invest more in local news outlets across the country, and to better compete with deep-pocketed tech companies. Others say lifting the cap will consolidate viewpoints and hand control over to newsrooms in New York and Hollywood, choking out local views. But more fundamental than the optimal policy is the law. It may be the case that the FCC cannot modify the 39% cap because Congress set that number in statute. I look forward to hearing these perspectives and more today. If there's one thing that's clear, it's this: current media ownership rules were written in a vastly different technological age. The days when broadcasters built a uniform global village across America's living rooms is over. As media has splintered into thousands of websites, TikTok accounts, podcasts, and other forms of content, each catering to its own niche audience. Yet even in this fragmented landscape, the media's ability to shape national discourse remains incredibly powerful, making questions about market concentration as important as ever. This hearing is designed to inform Congress in answering these questions. Should Congress revisit underlying statutes, and does the FCC have appropriate authority or flexibility to address today's evolving media landscape? I'm grateful to our witnesses for being here today to help us in this effort. I now turn to Ranking Member Cantwell.
Broadcast television once united America. It brought the country I Love Lucy. It introduced millions to Elvis Presley and the Beatles on national TV. It showed Americans the moon landing, the Nixon-Kennedy debate, and Ronald Reagan's challenge to tear down this wall. That shared national experience shaped culture, politics, and identity. Now, according to Senator Ted Cruz, that era is over, and broadcasters are fighting to survive in a radically transformed media landscape. At a recent hearing on the state of the broadcast industry, Cruz raised a fundamental question. Are America's media ownership laws stuck in the past, or are they still protecting something vital? For decades, broadcast stations were tightly regulated. Why? Because they were powerful. With limited channels and massive audiences, holding a broadcast license was often described as a license to print money. To prevent monopolies and protect viewpoint diversity, Congress imposed ownership caps, including a national audience reach limit. One key number, 39%. Under federal law, no single broadcast company can reach more than 39% of U.S. television households. That cap has been in place since 2004. But the world of 2004 is not the world of 2026. Today, Americans consume media through streaming platforms, YouTube, podcasts, TikTok, cable news, social media feeds. Broadcasters are no longer competing against just each other. They're competing against tech giants with global reach and virtually unlimited scale. And that's Cruz's argument. He says the rules were written for a different technological era, when 3 networks dominated living rooms and local stations controlled regional narratives. Now, audiences are fragmented. Advertising dollars are fleeing traditional TV, and tech platforms, not broadcasters, command the largest share of attention. So should the government still limit how large a broadcast company can grow? Supporters of lifting the cap argue this. Broadcasters need scale to survive. They need capital to invest in local journalism. They need flexibility to compete with trillion-dollar tech companies. If you keep them artificially small while tech companies operate without similar restrictions, you tilt the field. That's the pro-deregulation case. But critics see something very different. They argue that lifting the 39% cap would accelerate consolidation. Fewer owners, more centralized control, less local independence. They warn that newsroom decisions could increasingly be dictated from corporate hubs in New York or Los Angeles, rather than by local journalists who understand their communities. And here's the key tension. Broadcasting may no longer dominate like it once did, but it still holds enormous influence. Local news remains one of the most trusted sources of information for many Americans. And ownership structure affects editorial decisions. So this debate isn't just about economics. It's about power. Who controls narratives? Who shapes public perception? Who decides what stories get airtime? Cruz acknowledged something important in his remarks. Even in a fragmented digital world, media still shapes national discourse. That hasn't changed. What has changed is who holds that power. In the past, it was major broadcast networks. Today, it's often tech platforms, companies that aren't bound by the same ownership caps, content regulations, or public interest requirements. So Congress faces a difficult question. Do you deregulate broadcasters to match the modern landscape? Or do you maintain ownership limits to prevent further concentration in an already polarized media environment? There's also a legal wrinkle. The 39% cap isn't just an FCC rule. It's written into federal statute.